I have been a big fan of Nick Drake for many years now. He's an artist I haven't mentioned much on the channel, and I felt he deserved a video. Now, of course, Nick Drake is that British songwriter, English songwriter that emerged in the late 60s, made 3 albums, and then committed suicide in 1974 before he'd achieved any level of fame. After he died, people discovered his albums, and he is now a really established artist. But because he died so young and before he was famous, he is part of that sort of quite elusive and mysterious group of musicians, probably most personified by Robert Johnson, but also includes people like Judy Sill or even Eva Cassidy. And there is something about us knowing how loved, how the fan base for these artists, and yet the artists themselves never knew that. In Nick Drake's case, it's even more magnified by the fact that he seemed to be quite upset by the lack of attention his music got, and so we feel that perhaps his self-inflicted demise is actually down to the lack of love that his music had, which is a shame, because now, of course, we really love his music. Nick Drake, for me, is one of the greatest songwriters of all time. And I feel that the bracket of folk musician actually hems him in. I think that may well have been the thing that held him back in the early days. He created his own music world that goes way beyond simple folk music. And I think that is why he's loved so much. There is nobody else really like Nick Drake. Now, you may have noticed I'm not in my studio, and this video has started in quite a strange way. I'm doing a very English thing of going for a Sunday drive, and I'm about to do the very English thing. Actually, I've ended up in an English queue, so we are now stuck in an English traffic jam. But this video is unlike all the. There's such a huge amount of information now on Nick Drake. So many biographies, so many interviews with people who knew him, documentaries. And why? Because us fans, there's a mystery there and we cannot quite grasp it. And you could try and get every single bit of information you can about Nick Drake to try and solve this mystery, but I don't even think we know what the mystery is. There's something incredibly compelling. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go on a miniature English odyssey. We have just left my town and we're going to head through the English countryside. If you don't want to listen to what I'm talking about, you can just sit back and appreciate that, which will be very beautiful. And we are going to make our way in real time to Tamworth in Arden, to a church where Nick Drake's remains are buried. Now, I don't know whether the reason why Nick Drake is such a mystery to me is because I know I can't quite get my hands on it. I can't quite get a grip on it. So I've always wondered if I actually went to the grave and saw it, perhaps that would put him into some sort of context, because it is now over 50 years since this guy died. If he was alive now, he would be 78 years old, and yet he died at 26 years old, frozen in time. I think I need to do a little bit of biography of Nick Drake, although that is not the main subject of this video. So, as I've said, he was born in Rangoon in 1948 to upper middle class parents. When he was pretty young, he returned to the UK, living very close to where I live in the Midlands, out near Solihull, South Birmingham. Having a very sort of upper middle class privileged background, I think really creates some. It puts Nick Drake in a bracket of musicians that are going to enter the 1960s questioning that sort of background. In other words, rebelling from the sort of professions that the upper middle classes would have gone into. He goes down that route, you know, eventually ending up at Cambridge studying English literature. But there's another thing about Nick Drake's family. His parents are musicians, amateur musicians, but they are musicians. And his mother, Molly, is a songwriter herself. If anyone influenced Nick, it was his mom. Such is the interest in Nick Drake that Molly's songs, which she did record, have now been released on a CD, and you can go and listen to that, and you can hear a certain approach to songwriting that goes beyond folk music, and I think actually goes to the English classical music tradition, perhaps, you know, Vaughan Williams and Delius. And I think there's that aspect of Nick's music where he tries to boil down that aesthetic into something quite simple. In doing this, his virtuosity on guitar is quite incredible. But going back to the story, Nick goes to Cambridge. He meets up with another musician, a guy called Robert Kirby, who is studying composition. I think this meeting propels him towards thinking of himself as a musician. And I think coming from the background he's in, he gravitates to that burgeoning folk scene that is happening in the UK at that time. Nick Drake happens to be at the centre of a revolution that's happening in this country. There is a dialogue going back and forth between the United Kingdom and America. America had rhythm and blues and rock and roll. Then we had the Beatles. Then the UK had Bob Dylan and that whole folk scene, people like Phil Ox, Pete Seeger. And then the Beatles respond to that, other groups respond to that, and British folk musicians start to involve themselves in rock and roll. The players in this scene would be Pentangle, Bert Jansch, Davy Graham, Fairport Convention. Very quickly, Nick Drake seems to be right in the centre of that world. This is something that's not really stated. Yes, he wasn't famous. Yes, people never really discovered his music while he was alive, but he sat in the centre of this movement, a virtuoso musician who was eventually spotted by the bass player of Fairport Convention, Ashley Hutchins. Ashley Hutchins introduced him to Joe Boyd. Now, Joe Boyd is a music producer that really had a vision and was really championing this new English folk rock movement that's happening. There's a number of producers I think we need to mention here. The first would be Tom Wilson, who produced the early Dylan albums. He also produced Frank Zappa's first album, and before that he had produced albums by John Coltrane and Cecil Taylor. An absolute visionary, I think, that could see how folk music could be put alongside that folk music could be put alongside, you know, jazz and rock music. Another producer in America that then came and really started to really guide some of the American folk bands was Joe Simon. And in 1967, Joe Simon produced an album by Leonard Cohen, his debut album called, you know, The Songs of Leonard Cohen. This is quite interesting. It's all right, I've lost my sat nav here. This is happening in real time, and I'm actually following a sat nav to get to the destination. I keep losing it, so this is all part of this journey. Well, I don't want to get lost. That'd be the last thing to do. Here I am juggling all this stuff, trying to drive there, trying to think about, you know, his career, trying to remember all the names, but mainly try and get my hands and focus my attention onto this mystery. So where were we? The songs of Leonard Cohen. This album's really interesting because Leonard Cohen had taken what Bob Dylan had done and used folk music to write songs that were incredibly personal. And on this album, it cleverly used other musicians, but in a very sparing way. Sometimes Leonard Cohen would appear with a rhythm section. Other times it might be just the sparse instrumentation of, say, a saxophone or maybe even vibraphones. And I think Joe Boyd was very influenced by this approach. Joe Boyd at that point was working for Island Records, and he was championing two musicians. One was Nick Drake, the other was John Martyn. Now, John Martyn did go on to have an illustrious career and has become a stalwart of the story of British folk music. But like Nick Drake, I feel that John Martyn took the form and went past it. These are two giants of music. Now, where Nick Drake's reputation has only improved as time's gone on, I often feel that John Martyn is not given he's not valued in the way that he should be. And I think that is perhaps because he challenged the orthodoxy of folk music, going into realms of jazz and even sort of hippie, sort of druggy type music. I absolutely love John Martyn. He emerges roughly at the same time as Nick Drake, initially working with his wife Beverly Martyn. She actually got the deal first, and John Martyn and Beverly Martyn were friends with Nick Drake. There are three albums that I would like to point you towards in terms of John Martyn. His first album, Stormbring, with Beverly Martyn, establishes him on the folk scene, but these three albums would be Bless the Weather, Solid Air, and then Inside Out. Three albums that really progress out of the blues towards his own style, culminating for me in his live album Live at Leeds and the absolutely trippy and non-folk album One World. John Martyn is a charismatic, brash, alcohol and drug binging type of person. He's almost like the opposite to Nick Drake, but they're friends. They seem to be yin to each other's yang, and I think there's a key to understanding him with that. In 1968, Nick Drake goes into the recording studio and he records his first album, which I have here, and I'm going to show it you whilst driving, which is probably a little bit dangerous. Here we have it. And this is, of course, the incredible Five Leaves Left. I believe this is his best album. Other people would say different. This album was recorded in downtime, so unlike most folk albums where someone would go in for like a couple of days, get the album recorded, it would be released, Nick Drake was able to go back and work on this album and think about it. This album takes that approach from Leonard Cohen and utilises sparse arrangement to create a number of songs, each of which is its own world of songwriting. For me, when I put this album on, every time a song comes up, I'm like, oh yeah, this is a classic song, this is a classic song, oh my god, this is a classic song. On it we have, folk legends like Danny Thompson and Richard Thompson, and they add brilliantly to it. This album is on Island Records, and I think everybody thought, not just Nick Drake, but everybody thought that this would establish him as one of the great songwriters of that time. And for me, it's set up like that. a lot of people say that the fact that it was recorded over 6 months, you know, on downtime is a sort of detrimental, that the album wasn't quite a success. But they threw everything at it. They, like the Leonard Cohen album where Joe Simon had done the string arrangements, there are orchestral string arrangements on this album, most notably by his friend Robert Kirby, who was also unknown at the time. He does an excellent job of bringing in an almost sort of Edwardian cocktail classical approach, which I think places a lot of these songs in the English tradition, within the English aesthetic. Of course, his most famous song is the second song on this album, Riverman, with an orchestral arrangement from, what was his name? Harry Robertson. Harry Robertson was actually the sort of staff composer for Hammer Horror, and composed the music to The Vampire Lovers, Twins of Evil, Countess Dracula, that sort of run of 70s Hammer Horror films. I actually think that Harry Robertson plays a huge part in the mystique of Nick Drake. The songwriting on here is incredible, but Riverman has an aspect to it where it seems to go way beyond folk music into the realms of almost classical music. It's spiritual, it's otherworldly, and that really comes from the incredible orchestration, which sets this track apart from other tracks on this album. Harry Robertson repeated this in 1977 on, what was the track called? It's a Sandy Denny track, and it could be called something like All My Days. It's all something anyway. For me, this track is as revelatory as Riverman is. Go and check it out. And on that track, Harry Robertson goes even deeper into this English folk song combined with an almost Delius-like aesthetic. Now, we are currently driving through the English town of Bromsgrove. It really is not personifying the English aesthetic at all. It's a nice little English town. You can see we're passing the flags that have been posted on many lampposts throughout the country. But as you can see, there's not a cloud in the sky, and this sort of rich height of summer aesthetic that you are travelling through with me, I think is personified in the music of Delius. I feel that Delius hangs over a few other folk musicians or songwriters. I think Sandy Denny has that aspect as well, as does Kate Bush, who wrote a song all about Delius. That for me is part of the brilliance of Nick Drake. This is not folk music. Everything I love about this music is the stuff that makes it not folk music. The almost like modal drones of jazz, the sort of strange modulation in the guitar, the sort of weird arrangements, the use of, say, African percussion or Latin American percussion, you know, congas and stuff like this. And John Martyn's doing exactly the same thing on his albums Bless the Weather, Solidaire and Inside Out. I feel that Solidaire really gets a lot of coverage in terms of John Martyn, whereas actually for me the real genius album is Bless the Weather, which also emerges around about the same time. At this point, John Martyn has discovered the Echoplex and is creating these long drone jazz-like druggy sort of contemplations. It's quite incredible. This must have had an effect on Nick Drake. So I think what I'm trying to say is that there is a jazz influence in here, albeit far subtler, but I think that might be something that I find really great about it. Anyway, this album comes out eventually, and it's not a great success. It's on a major label, and the label tries to promote it as best they can. But the thing is, Nick Drake does not want to really promote it. It's legendary, the fact that Nick Drake didn't do that many concerts. We have one fuzzy photograph of him performing live. Why did he not want to do this? And people who reported seeing him said he did not speak. There's an introversion about Nick Drake which is very compelling on these records, but in terms of a performer or someone who's trying to promote their music, it's non-existent. So we start to have this feeling that Nick Drake's lack of success could well be because of Nick Drake. Right, we're just coming up to an island now, and I want to make sure I don't go the wrong way. I think we've got to join the motorway for a short while, which I didn't expect. I really expected this to be a drive through the English countryside where you could appreciate that, but actually this has been traffic and roadworks and a whole host of stuff that's not that conducive. But I suppose sometimes life does not turn out the way you want it to. We are now stopped at a pelican crossing. A lady's walking her dog. All quiet Sunday activity. I am about to join the motorway, something I did not expect to be doing. A little bit of trepidation enters the video. So, perhaps it was anxiety that affected Nick Drake in his dislike of promoting, of going out and doing the whole sort of rock and roll hoopla. The lack of success, I think, meant that Joe Boyd went back to the drawing board. And very soon they were back in the studio making the next album, the second album, which is also an absolute masterpiece. I have the album here, which I'm going to try and show you whilst joining the motorway. So I'll just wait till I've got on nice and safe. There we go. Brighter Later, the second album. When I was young, that was seen as the masterpiece. I don't think it is now. Why was it seen as the masterpiece? I think because, I'm just checking my sat nav, making sure everything's all okay. I think because it's more commercial, it's more accessible. The arrangements are richer, there's more of a standard rock rhythm section on there. You could tell Nick's tried to write tunes that are definitely brighter, that are catchier. It's an incredible album, but that sort of introspective acoustic aspect is lost somewhat and replaced with an accessibility which is quite charming. I love Brighter Later. I don't think you can understand Nick Drake unless you have both of these albums. This album came out, it was marketed again, but I think by this point Nick Drake's emotional problems are starting to emerge quite deeply. He's placed on antidepressants, he seems to isolate himself off, his drug use, he's smoking a lot of cannabis, and that seems to be driving him into a certain place. There are references to this on the albums, and he starts to become very isolated. He lives in London in a flat, he's on his own, and you feel that this guy that was part of the folk scene, that was embedded in it, that knew absolutely everybody in this world, with the record company supported him with brilliant production, is somehow self-destructing within this. Now, it would be very easy to say this was a privileged young man who probably expected to get things and he didn't get them, and perhaps that was a shock to him and he spun down. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned on this video is Nick Drake's sister. Nick Drake wasn't the only talent in the family. Nick Drake's sister is a lady called Gabrielle Drake, who's an actress, a very, very famous actress of film and television. She currently resides in a priory which is out in Much Wenlock, I believe. Now, many years ago, when I was playing with Robert Plant, I was in a band called the Priory of Brian. On our first professional photo shoot, we decided to, well, I didn't decide it, but I suppose Robert decided to utilise the whole idea of a priory. And so we decamped over to the priory owned by Gabrielle Drake. Now, I was under the impression when I went to do the photo shoot there, and we were literally clambering about on the ruins of the priory there, that Nick Drake's remains were there in Much Wenlock, which seems an apt place for him to reside. They're not. In a completely different place, as we will hopefully see in a few minutes. I was a big fan of Nick Drake, knowing that I was, or feeling I was stood on that ground. I became more interested in him as an artist. Now, Gabrielle Drake, this really makes the whole story even stranger, because Gabrielle Drake then went on to act in a TV series called UFO, which was one of the first live-action series or films by Jerry Anderson. I was obsessed with this as a young guy. Gabrielle Drake played one of the sort of alien ladies with the sort of purple bob, very iconic. So Nick Drake, who we are scrabbling around for any photos of or any sort of information about, anything to try and explain who this genius was and maybe what went wrong. Why did he end up killing himself? Could that have not happened? All those questions that you have it is related directly to one of the most photographed people you could ever have, a film star, a television star. Gabrielle Drake has also gone on to be the sort of keeper of her brother's flame. And we have had someone who's been able to explain in great detail every aspect of Nick Drake's life. In this respect, he differs greatly from someone like Robert Johnson, where we've had to have researchers go back to really try and understand who this person was. So there's a mass of information. So, for example, there was no suicide note when Nick Drake committed suicide in 1974. We want there to be one, but there is a note. There was a letter in his pocket that wasn't posted. Now, it's worthwhile just describing what had happened here. Nick Drake was obviously in a bad way and had returned to the family home, which we have to remember was a huge, sort of almost like a stately home in the English sort of countryside. A place of absolute safety where you think you could pull yourself together. The guy's got this is the thing that really strikes me. The guy's got absolutely everything. He's got everything at his disposal. He's got a massive support mechanism. He has got so many people around him. But a month before he died, he seems to have a row with John Martyn. Him and John Martyn have travelled together through this, but John Martyn, as I've said, is a completely different personality. And I think as John Martyn went into sort of excessive alcoholism, partying all day long, it's sort of a real hellraiser lifestyle, Nick Drake is going the opposite way into introspection and sort of withdrawalness, if that's a word. So there must have been a tension there. What did John Martyn say to Nick Drake? What was said at that point? Did he tell him some home truths? I don't know. When John Martyn found out that Nick Drake had died, he burst out laughing, upsetting his wife Beverly, and they'd all been very close. But also there is the content of the letter that was on it, which was a letter to what he thought was his girlfriend, although he never actually went out with a lady called Sophia, who he'd asked to marry, even though they weren't seeing each other. So all of these events seem to be, I hate to say it, but the actions of a spoilt teenager, perhaps. We don't know. I have to say this because I think it's part of the mystery of Nick Drake. And we now have to try and deal with that. The mystery. We're currently, it says we're about 5 minutes away from our destination. We're heading to the town of Tamworth, and I'm assuming there will be a beautiful English church in there. And normally when you visit a graveyard, it's quite hard to find graves, but I have read that his gravestone is under an oak tree. So I should be able to spot at least an oak tree in this graveyard. We're coming off here, aren't we? Just taking the signpost to Tamworth in Arden. When I envisaged this video, I thought I'll drive to the church and I will explain my take on Nick Drake. Now I'm here, I am experiencing quite a strange feeling. We're in the district of Stratford upon Avon. We are also deep in J.R.R. Tolkien country. This is about as English as it gets. We've had a bit of a fight to get here on the motorway, through various towns. It hasn't as been as idyllic as I thought, but as soon as we get to here, suddenly I feel I'm right in the heart of England. The trees are starting to grow over the road, and we're getting that very English flash as you go through the leaves, which I hope you can see. We're literally 3 minutes away now. I should be telling you about what I think the mystery is, but I actually have got no answer for you. I'm actually in a place where I don't know where I am, I don't know where we're going, I don't know what's about to happen, I don't know what we're going to see. But suddenly we are being drawn into this place. Just a few miles away from where Shakespeare was born. This is Nick Drake country. And perhaps this is the mystery, I don't know. We've got 2 minutes to go now. We're very close. pull the car over. And I don't know if you can see into the car in front, but they have these strange, can you see that in the car in front? I don't know whether you can, but there's some strange headrests. This is beautiful, but it's quite creepy. Right, let's see what we can find out. Yeah, it's in here. Right, so what you need to do, you want to get your phone and
recording now.
I might do an edit, or I might just let it go. I've got to unplug that microphone, and we're going to venture into here. I'm not going to be speaking, right? You're just going to film it as we go in. I'll leave these running in the car, I think, just so. Okay, so we need to put that window up.
Use that too.
I want it. Can you start filming me now? You've got to do it that way around. Are you ready to go then? This is the gravestone. Whole ton of plectrums here. Someone's brought a stone with pink moon on, an album I didn't discuss in the video. Perhaps his most personal album, and the one that many fans feel is the closest to him as a person. We have it here, Nick Drake, 1948 to 1974, and then his parents, Rodney Drake, Molly Drake, under this beautiful oak tree. And it's the age of the gravestone. You realise how much time has passed, really. Do you have a look? What's the reason I knew it was here is because if you want, Grace, do you want to come around and just film this bit here? It says, the Drake's family grave is private property. Please do not place any adornments apart from small floral tributes and messages on or near the grave space. which is probably explains for why there's not that much here. There's some relatively fresh flowers, but what's it say on the back?
Can you not read that?
It says,
Now
we rise
and we are everywhere.
and we are everywhere. I think that's a Nick Drake lyric off perhaps the verse, I'm not too sure. Well, what does it tell you? Well, it's a beautiful place. Absolutely beautiful place. I don't know. It's just a gravestone. You know, these people aren't here anymore. We are, but they're not. That's it. They're gone. You know, we do what we do. And perhaps the big mystery is the fact that we're still here and they're not. And you can't get your hands on that. So perhaps what it is really is there is an aspect of grief with this story which chimes with all of us who have lost our loved ones, who no longer exist except in our memories, and you can't get your fingers on them. I can remember my dad saying once he'd found a letter that was written by his dad, and he came in and he said to me, he said, my dad wrote this, and he wrote on the paper, he wrote down the words, and he was thinking what he was writing, but now he doesn't exist. He's no longer around, right? Now my dad's dead as well, and so my dad is now that. He said that to me, and I remember that. I think that this is really about our grief, really. Hello there.
They have the festival.
I thought. Oh yes, well that's it. I think we're at the end of the video. So if you like this video, we've got out the house anyway, haven't we? We've got out the house, and you've seen some prettiness. And for those of you who are not able to take that journey to visit a place like this, I hope that is the closest you're going to get. So. I have to be honest, seeing the grave was one thing, but actually coming into this little church here and being met with this is absolutely, it's just incredible. The quality of the architecture, the quality of the stained glass, is absolutely incredible. Walk up to the altar. Wow. Look at the organ. Look at the quality of this carving here.